We harvested 800 pounds of potatoes by hand. No machines, no shortcuts, just community. But here is what nobody tells you about harvest days like this. The real cost of doing it by hand is not measured in hours or backaches. It is measured in something far more valuable and far more expensive than you ever realized. Stay with me, because at the very end of this video, I am going to reveal the one hidden calculation that changes everything about how you should think about community labor, DIY homestead work, and why some of the most successful small farms are ditching their machines and going back to doing it the old way. And the reason might shock you. If you are running a homestead, building a self-sufficient life, or just tired of paying professionals for things you can do yourself, you need to subscribe right now. Because everything we talk about here is designed to save you money without forcing you to sacrifice quality or sanity. And I really want to hear from you in the comments. What is the biggest project you have tackled by hand on your property that most people would just hire someone to do? Drop it below. I read every single comment, and your story might inspire the next video. Wait, this part is critical, so I need your full attention for just a second. Everything we are about to walk through, from the labor math, to the hidden costs of mechanization, to why Amish and plain community farms are actually outcompeting industrial operations in profitability, all of it is explained in far greater detail in my complete DIY Homestead Hacks Guide, which breaks down not just the philosophy, but the actual mechanics of how to run a hand-powered operation and stay ahead financially. That guide is in the description and pinned in the comments if you want to go deeper on this. Now, let me tell you what happened when I decided to actually track the numbers behind hand harvesting versus what you would spend hiring a crew or renting machines. The average homesteader thinks hand harvesting is inefficient, that you lose time, lose yield, and waste effort. But that assumption is built on industrial agriculture logic, which operates on a completely different set of economics than a small homestead or a plain community farm. And the moment you understand that difference, everything shifts. Last fall, I worked with 3 neighboring properties, all of them running small-scale operations, all of them growing potatoes as either a primary or secondary cash crop. One family went mechanical. They rented a potato digger for a day, and the cost was $95 plus fuel, plus the labor to operate it and clean the machine afterward. The other 2 families did what their grandparents did. They gathered community, they harvested by hand, and they spent roughly the same 9 or 10 hours of combined labor. Here is the first surprise. The mechanical harvest took 5 hours of actual digging time and left behind more potatoes in the soil than either of the hand-harvested fields. Why? Because mechanical harvesters are tuned for speed and volume, not for care or completeness. They miss potatoes below 4 ounces or so. They miss ones that are partially buried or tangled in roots. A hand crew, by contrast, does not leave money behind. Not when it is being split among 5 or 6 people who know that every potato they find is part of their share or their neighbor's profit. But the real story is not the yield difference, it is the downstream costs. The mechanical harvest sounds good until you calculate what happens next. Potatoes brought up too fast and too violently have bruises that do not show immediately. They show up 3 weeks later, when you are trying to sell them or store them. Bruised potatoes rot faster, which means loss of inventory, loss of profit, and sometimes loss of the entire crop, if rot spreads through your storage facility. The 2 hand-harvested operations, 0 rot loss, 0. Their potatoes stayed fresh because they were handled gently, sorted immediately, and stored with care the same day they were dug. The family that rented the machine harvested about 2,700 pounds of potatoes. After losses to rot and split potatoes that were not salvageable, they actually brought to market around 2,400 pounds. The 2 families doing hand harvest brought in 2,600 and 2,800 pounds respectively. Same field size, same soil, same variety of potato. The only difference was the method. Now multiply that across a season, or across 5 seasons. The hand harvest families were pulling an extra 300 to 400 pounds of saleable product per year, while spending roughly the same amount of labor and money. That is not just efficiency. That is a completely different business model. But there is a second cost that most people never calculate at all: the cost of ownership and maintenance. A mechanical harvester sits in a shed the rest of the year. It costs between $40 and $80 a day to rent, or between $2,500 and $8,000 to own if you want to do it yourself. Owned machines need repairs. They need fuel and storage and parts that break. A hand fork costs $30 once and works for 30 years. A shovel costs $20. These tools do not depreciate. They do not need tune-ups. They are not breaking down in the middle of harvest season because a bearing wore out. One of the families I followed actually calculated this for me. They had owned a digger for 6 years before switching to hand harvest. Over that time, they spent roughly $4,000 on purchase, maintenance, fuel, and storage. The hand harvest setup cost them $80 for 2 new hand forks and the occasional replacement handle. Same yield, lower cost, and they were done with the headache of machinery. This is where the plain communities, the Amish farmers, and the traditional homesteading culture have cracked a code that modern agriculture completely misses. They are not using hand labor because they cannot afford machines. They are using hand labor because it is actually more profitable. Think about it from first principles. When you own a machine, you are committed to using it. You have to find enough work to justify the investment. You start taking jobs you might not otherwise take. You take jobs in conditions that stress the machine because you need the machine to pay for itself. You are beholden to the machine. But a hand crew is only together when the work requires it. They can be selective. They can wait for perfect weather. They can work on their own schedule, and each person on the crew knows that the only way the job happens is if everyone shows up and works together. And here is the thing that really changes the economics. A machine operates at roughly 60 to 70% efficiency in real-world conditions. Mechanical breakdowns, uneven ground, operator fatigue, weather delays, these all chip away at the theoretical maximum. A hand crew, by contrast, operates at 85 to 90% efficiency because there is inherent built-in quality control. Every person is invested in completeness. Every person is watching the work and adjusting. If something is wrong, it gets corrected immediately, not 3 rows later when the operator realizes the digger skipped a section. Now I want to pause here for a moment because something else is happening in these hand harvest communities that does not show up on a spreadsheet at first glance. The families who harvest by hand together are not just processing potatoes. They are practicing a specific form of social capital that has a real monetary value later in the season. When frost threatens in October, the same crew gathers to harvest the last of the vegetables. When there is a barn to raise or a fence line that needs rebuilding, those same people show up. Because they have already worked together. They have already invested in each other. The machine-dependent operation does not have this. The contractor comes, does the job, leaves, and there is no ongoing relationship or obligation. That social capital is worth money. It is worth unexpected help during crisis. It is worth shared equipment and knowledge and insurance against the unpredictable year. In economic terms, this is called reciprocal obligation, and it is one of the reasons why plain community farms survive downturns that destroy industrial operations. They are not just buying food security, they are buying community resilience. But the third, and probably most counterintuitive cost of mechanization is the cost of skill loss. When you harvest by hand, you are touching every potato. You are learning to feel the difference between a potato that is ready to dig and one that is still small. You are learning the soil texture of your property, understanding which patches are compacted and which are loose. You are developing an intuitive sense of your field that no machine operator ever develops because they are not in the soil with their hands. They are sitting on a tractor seat watching a mechanical implement do work they do not understand on an intimate level. I spent 3 days with one particular family, and by the 3rd day, the teenage daughter could walk along a row and predict within 2 pounds how much harvestable potato was in that 20-foot section, just by the size and spacing of the plants and the feel of the soil. That skill took her maybe 6 or 7 hours to develop. A machine operator with 15 years of experience would struggle to develop that same intuition because machines abstract away the feedback loop that builds intuition. This matters because skill is capital. It compounds. It is not consumed when you use it. It gets sharper. And when you teach that skill to the next generation, as these communities do, you are building agricultural intelligence that survives economic downturns, seed failures, weather catastrophes, and all the other unpredictable forces that regularly destroy operations that rely entirely on purchased inputs and hired specialists. The family that did the hand harvest for me tracked everything. They kept records, and at the end of the season, they did the math. They had harvested and processed 800 pounds of market-grade potatoes using roughly 110 hours of total labor. That is about 7 or 8 people working together over one main harvest day, plus a few smaller sorting and storage sessions. That works out to roughly $8.70 per pound of final product. When you factor in all the hidden costs, the small tools, the food and water for the crew, the equipment maintenance, the storage setup, when they priced what they would have paid a professional harvesting contractor to do the same work, the quote was $1,240, or $1.55 per pound of labor cost alone. That does not include the losses to rot, the damage, or the ownership costs of the equipment. So the question I had going into this was, why is anyone still using machines if hand harvesting is more profitable and produces better results? The answer is time, or more specifically, the perception of time. Machines are faster in terms of calendar days. A mechanical digger can process an acre in a few hours. Hand harvest of that same acre takes most of a day or a day and a half. If you measure only the direct time, the machine wins. But if you measure the total cost per unit of output, including all the downstream effects, the hand method is not just better, it is dramatically better. The industrial assumption is that time is money, so faster is always better. But on a small property, that assumption breaks down. The true cost of speed, when you add in equipment, maintenance, losses, damage, and opportunity costs, is substantially higher than the cost of doing things deliberately and well. And this is where the numbers become really interesting for anyone running a homestead or a small farm. If your property is less than 50 acres dedicated to a single crop, mechanization stops making economic sense somewhere around the 30 to 40 acre mark. Below that, hand labor and simple, multi-purpose tools consistently outperform machines in terms of profit per acre. The industrial farming model depends on massive scale to amortize the machine costs. A small homestead does not have that scale, so the machine is actually a liability, not an asset. The other thing I realized during this project is that there is a calendar advantage to understanding this. Machines need perfect conditions to operate. Ground that is not too wet, not too dry, no rocks, relatively flat terrain. A hand crew can work in conditions that would damage a machine. We harvested those potatoes in light rain because the crew could see what they were doing and adjust their technique. A mechanical digger would have sat idle, and the harvest would have been delayed until the ground dried out. That delay is also a cost. It means the potatoes are in the ground longer, exposed to more risk of rot or pest damage. One more calculation that shifts everything. The quality of the final product directly affects the price you can command in the market. The hand-harvested potatoes from this operation were sold to a local restaurant and a farm stand. They commanded a premium of about 40 cents per pound over commodity potatoes because they were clearly superior, better condition, no bruising, fresher, handled with care. That 40-cent premium on 800 pounds is $320, which is more than enough to cover every cost of hand harvesting and then some. The mechanical harvest operation had to sell their potatoes at commodity prices because the quality was lower and the rot loss was higher. This is the hidden economy of the hand method that spreadsheets do not capture. You are not just saving money on equipment and labor, you are creating a better product that commands better pricing, which means the entire economic equation shifts in your favor. And so here is the thing that nobody talks about in the mechanical farming circles. The communities that are thriving right now, the ones that are actually making money and building resilience, are the ones that understand that efficiency is not the same as profitability. Efficiency is about doing something fast. Profitability is about doing something that produces more value than it costs. The hand harvest crews I followed are making better margins, losing less to waste, building stronger community relationships, and creating jobs for teenagers and seasonal workers that actually provide real training in agricultural literacy. They are doing this while using less fuel, generating less wear and tear on the land, and creating a product that brings higher prices. Every single metric that matters for a sustainable operation is better with the hand method than with the machines. And this changes how you should think about your own homestead. If you are currently looking at buying equipment or renting machinery for your harvest season, stop and run these numbers. Look at your actual acreage. Calculate the full cost of the machine. Not just the rental, but the downstream losses, the maintenance, the storage, the potential damage to soil from heavy equipment running when it is too wet. Compare that to the cost of hiring a crew for 2 or 3 days to do it by hand, or organizing a community harvest day where people come together and share the work. I promise you that in probably 80% of homesteading situations, the hand method wins. But the deeper shift that needs to happen is in how we define success on a small farm or homestead. The industrial model says more, faster, bigger, cheaper. It is a model designed for scale, not for sustainability, for homesteads, for plain communities, and for anyone serious about building actual food security and resilience. The model is better, stronger, more local, more profitable. That second model requires you to think differently about labor. It requires you to see hand labor not as backward or inefficient, but as a skilled practice that produces better results. It requires you to build community relationships that can support harvest work without machines. And it requires you to measure success not in speed, but in the actual economic and nutritional value you are creating. This is something the families I followed understand intuitively because it is how they were raised. Their parents did it this way, their grandparents did it this way, and now they can see, with actual numbers, why that way works better than the mechanized alternative. Before we go deeper into what comes next, I need to make sure you have the full framework for understanding this. What we are talking about is not just a different harvest method, it is a fundamentally different economic model, and it applies to way more than potatoes. Every project on your homestead has this same math hidden underneath it. The decision to hire a contractor versus do it yourself, to buy a tool versus rent it, to build a fence with hired labor versus organize a community workday, all of it is governed by these same principles. That is exactly what my complete DIY Homestead Hacks Guide walks you through, step by step. It breaks down the actual cost calculations behind dozens of homestead projects and teaches you how to make these decisions from first principles instead of just guessing. It is waiting for you in the description and in the pinned comment. Seriously, grab it, because the math in that guide will change how you budget every single project for the next 5 years. Guys, now, the second thing that shifted for me during this project was understanding the labor calculation differently. Most people think about labor as a cost to be minimized. Hire cheaper, work faster, get it done, move on. But the most profitable operations I saw were thinking about labor as value to be maximized. Who is working? What are they learning? What relationships are being built? What long-term capacity is being created? One of the fathers I interviewed had been hiring his oldest son to help with harvest for 3 seasons. Last year, he told me, my son could estimate yield better than I could. He found sections of the field that were producing less than others, and we figured out it was a drainage problem we did not know we had. He saw it because he had developed an understanding of what healthy production looks like. A contractor would have never noticed, and we would have lost money for years without knowing why. End quote. That boy is now not just a laborer on his family's farm, he is a problem solver. He is an asset, and he is getting trained in a skill that will serve him for life, whether he stays on the farm or not. That training has real economic value, and it only happens because the work was done by hand where there is room for learning and observation. Compare that to a hiring model where a contractor comes in with a crew, does the harvest in a few hours, leaves, and nobody on your property learned anything except how long it takes to get through a pile of potatoes. You got the harvest done. You did not build capacity. You did not train the next generation. You did not create resilience. This is why the communities that are most stable, most profitable, and most resilient are the ones that emphasize hand labor and skill transfer. They are not doing it for romantic reasons or cultural preservation. They are doing it because it works better economically. The cultural and spiritual dimensions are real and meaningful, but they emerge from the economic logic, not the other way around. The Amish phrase for this is barn raising, but it applies to harvest too. The idea is simple. When there is significant work that needs doing, the community gathers. Everyone contributes. Everyone knows that next season or next year, when they have a big project, the same people will show up for them. It is not charity. It is not favor trading in a complicated way. It is reciprocal obligation that has been formalized and ritualized so reliably that it becomes almost automatic. And here is the practical part for anyone with a homestead. This model is available to you right now. You do not need to be Amish or plain. You do not need to be in a traditional agricultural community. You can organize a harvest day or a work day with your neighbors. You can create the same reciprocal obligation. You can build the same skills in your kids, and you can do it without machines, without hiring contractors, and with better economic results than any of the conventional alternatives. 800 pounds of potatoes, hand-harvested, hand-sorted, hand-stored. The families involved did not spend a fortune. They did not use machines. They did not extract themselves from the work. They did it together, and 800 pounds of high-quality potatoes is now going to feed them for months, or be sold at premium prices, or both. And the entire operation was more profitable, more resilient, and more educational than any mechanized alternative would have been. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. It is not about being nostalgic or rejecting modern technology. It is about understanding the actual math behind the decisions you make on your land. The hand method works better not because it is traditional, but because the economics of small-scale operation make it better. Traditional methods survive this long precisely because they are efficient in a way that modern equipment is not, for properties under a certain size. And that is the framework you need for rethinking every single project on your homestead. The question is never just, what is the fastest way? The question is, what is the most efficient way when you account for all costs, all downstream effects, all learning and capacity building? When you ask that question consistently, you make very different decisions. You do less hiring and more community building. You do less buying and more training. You do less outsourcing and more ownership of your own food system and your own skills. This is part one of what I want to walk through with you, and it is the foundation for everything that comes next. Now let me show you exactly how to apply this mindset to 5 specific homestead projects that most people either skip or pay professionals to handle. And here is the beautiful part. Every single one of these projects builds on the skill you just learned from the potato harvest. But before we get there, stop. I need you to really sit with this for a moment. The difference between a $3 fence and a $3.00 fence is not always materials. It is often the structure of how you approach the work, the planning, the use of available resources, the timing, and crucially, the people you invite to participate. Most homesteaders watch YouTube videos on fencing and think, I need a post hole digger, a level, a truck to haul materials, and probably I should hire someone who knows what they are doing. So the project never happens. Or it happens, but it costs a small fortune and takes a single weekend of exhausting solo work. Here is what the Amish approach teaches us instead. Invite 3 neighbors. Set a date. Make a simple plan. Supply coffee and a meal. Everyone learns something. The fence gets built. Relationships deepen. The cost per person per hour of their time feels reasonable because the social return is immediate and real. That fence project that you thought would cost $3 and require a contractor, it costs maybe $4 in actual materials, 2 days of work spread across 4 people, so really half a day per person, and it becomes a story everyone tells for years. The economics of that shift are staggering. But there is a second piece that most people miss entirely. Hold on, I need to make sure you understand what is actually happening here, because this is where the entire system unlocks. When you build with community instead of professionals, you are not just saving money on labor. You are creating knowledge transfer. Every person who shows up learns how to build a fence. Every person who shows up sees that it is possible without special equipment. Every person who shows up becomes more confident to start their own projects. This cascades. In most modern rural communities, that doesn't happen. People are isolated. A problem happens. Someone calls a contractor. The knowledge stays with the contractor. The homeowner writes a check and feels a little more dependent, not a little more capable. But when you build the way we are talking about, when you reverse engineer the project to emphasize learning and community participation, the whole trajectory of your homestead life changes. Now, most of you watching this are not Amish. You do not have a built-in community of neighbors who automatically show up. So what do? You build one. And the fastest way to build one is to start small and start with a project that naturally attracts help. This is where our next 5 projects come in, because each one of them, when structured correctly, serves a dual purpose. It solves a real problem on your homestead, and it becomes a vehicle for building the community and capacity you need for everything else. The first project is the raised garden bed system, and I want to be very clear about why this is where most people should start. A raised bed seems simple. It is a box. You fill it with soil, you grow food. But watch what happens when you structure it as a community project instead of a solo weekend. The cost comparison alone is worth understanding. A pre-built raised bed kit, the kind you see at garden centers, runs $1.50 to $3.000 per bed. If you want 4 beds, that is $6 to $1.200. If you want 8 beds, you are looking at $2.400 to $4. And that is before soil, before plants, before any of the setup. Build it yourself with scrap wood or reclaimed materials. You are at $2 to $4.00 per bed. 8 beds for $1.60 to $3.20 total. Soil costs what it costs, but now you have saved $2 to $4.000 on the structure alone. But here is the project plus community angle that most people never calculate. When you host a raised bed building party, you invite 5 or 6 friends. You provide materials and lunch. Everyone builds 1 or 2 beds together. Each person leaves understanding exactly how to build a bed themselves. When their own gardening season starts next year, they do not need to call a contractor. They just build. Now they start projects on their own property. They see you did it. You did not have special skills. You used materials you found, and suddenly the entire neighborhood is upgrading their food systems. That is the multiplier effect, and it costs you nothing extra, just intentionality about how you frame the work. So let us break down raised bed building in concrete terms. Materials needed: 4 pieces of wood for the frame. 2x6 or 2x8 boards work perfectly. Approximately $5 to $1.05 per bed if you use reclaimed wood or pallet wood. If you buy new lumber, maybe $2.00 to $3.00. You need corner brackets or screws to hold them together. Another $2 to $5. You need a drill with a screwdriver bit, a level, and a measuring tape. If you do not own these, they cost under $5 total as one-time investments. And after that first bed, the cost per additional bed drops to the wood and screws only. Assembly time: 20 to 30 minutes per bed if you are working alone. If you are working as part of a group helping each other, it might take 30 to 45 minutes per bed, but that includes talking, laughing, and teaching. The social time is built in. Next comes soil. This is where most people overpay dramatically. Pre-made garden soil mix: $4.00 to $8.00 per cubic yard delivered. A standard 4x8 raised bed that is 12 inches deep needs just under 1 cubic yard of soil. So $4.00 to $8.00 per bed. But here is what the experienced homesteaders know. You build your own soil over time. You compost kitchen scraps, yard waste, animal manure if you have animals. Within a season or two, you have created premium garden soil for essentially zero cost. The first year, you might fill your beds with a mix. Some purchase soil, some compost, some topsoil you source locally or reclaim from other projects on your property. Year 2 and beyond, you are using primarily soil you have made yourself. That shifts the economics completely. The first year might cost you $3.20 to $6.40 for soil for 8 beds, but in a 5-year window, you have saved $1.600 to $3.2200 in soil costs just by building a compost system. And your soil is better. It is healthier. It is alive. Commercial soil is sterile and tired by comparison. This is the second layer of the raised bed project. It is not just a garden. It becomes a system. Garden beds plus composting plus soil building plus water management, all of it connected. And every piece of it gets more efficient the longer you run it. Now, let me shift to the second major project, the one that saves the most money and reveals the most about how traditional homesteads actually operate: the DIY fence system. And I want to be absolutely clear, I am not talking about a decorative fence. I am talking about a functional fence that controls where animals can and cannot go, that defines property lines, that lasts for years with simple maintenance. The cost difference between a professionally installed fence and a community-built one is where the real lesson lives. A professional fence contractor charges $1.05 to $3.00 per linear foot installed. For 200 linear feet, which is a modest project for a small homestead, that is $3 to $6.000. Labor is the majority of that cost. DIY materials for the same 200 linear feet, $4 to to $8.00. Posts, wire or boards, fasteners. That is it. The labor cost is zero if you do it yourself or with friends. If you pay people to help, even at $2.00 per hour, you might add $2.00 to $4 total. You are still at $6 to $1, $2 to $4.00 to $6.000. You have cut the cost in half. Minimum. But here is the part that the Amish approach reveals that most contractors will not tell you. A fence you build yourself, with community help, gets maintained better. You know how it is built. You know where the weak points are. When a section needs repair, you fix it immediately instead of calling someone and waiting. The fence lasts longer. A professionally built fence? People often do not know how it is built. They do not feel ownership. They wait for problems to become obvious before they address them. The fence degrades faster. This is not theory. This is observable pattern in rural communities. The homesteads that last, that maintain their property value, that function efficiently, they are the ones where the owner understands how things are built and can repair them. Before we move to the third project, I need you to understand something fundamental about how this system compounds over time. The raised beds and the fence are not separate projects. The fence contains the garden and keeps animals out. The garden feeds people and animals. The compost from the garden waste feeds the soil. The posts from your fence repairs become stakes in the garden. Every single piece talks to every other piece. When you design your homestead as a system instead of as a series of disconnected problems, the cost and the labor drop dramatically. You stop asking, how much does this cost? You start asking, how does this fit into what we are already doing? And that question, that single shift in thinking, is worth thousands of dollars over 5 years. Now let me walk you through the water system, because this is where most homesteaders leave the biggest money on the table. The average homestead uses water for irrigation, for animals, for household purposes. Most people hook directly into a municipal system or a well and pump, and the costs just compound endlessly. But there is a far simpler way that costs almost nothing to build. A rain barrel system is almost comically cheap to build. A food-grade barrel, used, often free from restaurants or breweries, costs $0 to $5.00. The downspout diverter kit costs $2.00 to $4.00. A spigot costs $5 to $1.00. The first barrel is $2.05 to $1.00 in total materials. 1 inch of rain on a 1.000 square foot roof captures approximately 600 gallons of water. A typical homestead might collect 3.00 to 5.00 gallons in a month during the growing season. That is water that costs you nothing. No pump fees, no infrastructure, no maintenance beyond basic cleaning. Now multiply that. If you have 10 barrels, $2.50 to $1 total investment, you are collecting 30.2 season to 50,000 gallons of free water in a growing season. Do you have a garden? That water irrigates it for free. Do you have animals? That water fills their troughs for free. What would that same water cost through a municipal or pump system? Hundreds of dollars, possibly thousands. The payback on the initial barrel investment happens in a single season. But here is where most people stop, and they should not. A connected system where multiple barrels feed into a main line, where gravity naturally distributes water to different zones on your property, becomes an irrigation system that eliminates hand watering entirely. Install that system correctly on day one, and it costs maybe $3 to $5 and saves you 5 to 10 hours per week of manual watering work. That is $1, $0.000 to $2 in labor savings over a 5-year period, and you are only using free water. Okay, before we continue to the remaining 2 projects, I need to pause here and make sure you have the complete picture of what is happening with everything we have covered so far. Stop for a moment. This is important. In the description of this video and in the pinned comment, you will find a link to our complete guide, the full ebook that walks through not just these 5 projects, but 75 more. Every single one is structured the same way: materials, cost, timing, community angle, long-term maintenance, the systems thinking that ties it all together. That guide contains the detail that takes these principles and turns them into actual blueprints. I can walk you through the concept here, but if you want to execute it on your property, If you want to actually build these things and avoid the mistakes that turn a cheap project into an expensive disaster, the guide is where the real depth lives. It is available right now in the description. Now, the remaining two projects, and these are the ones that really show you how the Amish approach scales across your entire operation. Project 4, the tool shed, and Project 5, the animal shelter system. These two projects reveal the exact same principle we have been walking through, but now at a slightly larger scale. A professional contractor builds a 12 by 16 shed, basic, not fancy, and charges $3 to $5.000. An animal shelter or coop from a supply company costs $8 to $2, depending on size and quality. A DIY-built shed using reclaimed materials and community labor, $4 to $8. A community-built animal shelter, $2 to $5. You are saving $2 to few hundred to $4.200 per project. On 5 homesteads doing this together, that is $1 $1.000 to $2 $1.000 in saved expenses. But the efficiency part is what you need to see clearly. A shed you design and build yourself fits your property perfectly. It sits where you actually need it. The storage inside matches what you actually store. The workflow, going from house to garden to shed to compost area, becomes efficient instead of clunky. A pre-built or professionally designed shed, it is a standard size. It fits the lot approximately. It works, but you are walking further than you need to. You are storing things in places that do not make sense. You are losing time. The $4.00 shed is also faster to build, because you are building something simple that does exactly what you need, not something impressive that might look good in a catalog. Simple, purposeful, fitted to your actual life. That is the Amish aesthetic, and it is not accidental. It is economically optimal. The same logic applies to the animal shelter or coop. An expensive pre-built coop sitting in the wrong spot on your property costs you walking time, causes inefficiency in feeding and watering, and probably sits in bad drainage or poor sun exposure because you did not choose the location. The salesman did. A simple 8 by 12 shelter that you build specifically for your animals, positioned where the morning sun hits, where water drains away, where the path from your house is short, it works. The animals are healthier because the siting is appropriate. Predators are less successful because the structure was built with their behavior in mind. Maintenance is easier because you understand every inch of how it was built, and the cost difference compounds. A professionally installed coop might last 8 years before you need significant repairs. A well-built DIY coop, maintained by someone who understands its construction, lasts 15 to 20 years. That is not because one was built better. It is because maintenance happens early and often when the owner understands what is happening. Now, we have covered 5 projects in depth: raised beds, fencing, water systems, tool sheds, animal shelters. The total investment in materials, $2 to $4. The total value delivered in labor, in food production, in efficiency, in capacity building, $1 to $3, 0.000. But the real value, the one that does not show up in spreadsheets for several years, is what happened to you and your community during the building process. You became more capable. Your neighbors became more capable. Your property became more resilient and more productive. Your social connections deepened. You learned skills that are transferable to the next dozen projects. You proved to yourself that you can solve problems without writing big checks. This is what the Amish are teaching us, and this is the part that most modern economic analysis misses entirely. The financial return is real and substantial, but the human and social return is even larger. And here is the revelation I promised you at the beginning. The reason the Amish and Plain communities have survived and thrived for 400 years while so many other communities have fragmented is not because they are smarter or stronger. It is because they understood something that we have almost completely forgotten in the modern economy. They understood that the act of building together, of solving problems together, of failing together, of learning together, is not a side effect of getting something done. It is the actual product. The potatoes are the byproduct. The tool shed is the byproduct. The fence is the byproduct. The real product is a community that can take care of itself. When you spend money to hire someone else to solve your problem, You get the problem solved. That is all. The transaction is complete. But when you solve the problem yourself, when you learn to do it, when you teach your children to do it, when your neighbors learn from watching you do it, you get something that lasts far longer than the fix itself. You get a community that is less dependent on outside systems. You get skills that compound. You get confidence that grows. This is why the potato harvest in that plain community was not really about 800 pounds of potatoes. It was about 35 people proving to each other that they could accomplish something significant without professional equipment, without modern machinery, without outsourcing the work. And here is what applies directly to you. Every single time you choose to fix something yourself, instead of calling a professional, every time you build instead of buy, every time you figure out a problem using what you already have in your garage, you are not just saving money. You are building the same thing that the Amish have been building. You are building resilience. You are building competence. You are building a social safety net that will protect you and your family in ways that no amount of money alone ever could. The financial savings are real. We have talked about them all through this video. But they are not the deepest reason to do this work. The deepest reason is that you are reclaiming something that modern society sold you the idea of outsourcing: your own capacity to solve the problems in your life. That is the secret. That is why those 35 people gathered on that autumn morning to harvest potatoes by hand. Not because it was the most efficient way to do it, but because the process of doing it together was what made them strong. So here is your one challenge for this week. Pick one thing in your life that you have been putting off because you thought it would be too expensive to fix or too complicated to build. Just one. And instead of calling someone, instead of buying a replacement, instead of accepting that you cannot do it, try. Spend an hour. Use what you have. Watch a video. Ask a neighbor. Document what happens. Because the moment you do, you will understand something that the Amish have known all along. You are more capable than you think. And that capability is worth more than money. The work is not always easy. The first time you do something, it will probably take longer than you expected. You might make mistakes, but every single time you do, you become a little bit more self-reliant. Your family becomes a little bit more resilient. Your community becomes a little bit stronger. That is not hype. That is not ideology. That is just how human beings grow. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I really appreciate that you took the time. If this way of thinking about DIY, self-sufficiency, and community resilience resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you have a story of something you built or fixed yourself that changed the way you see your own capabilities, I would love to read it in the comments section below. That is how we learn from each other. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one. Final script character count, Part 3. 7.847 characters.